Recognize these. Yeah. That's allowed. Anonymously. Do we have presentations?
Yes.
No, that's not an option. You must lose faith in it. Får vi köra nu?
Yeah.
And you found what we need?
Yes.
And in case of emergency, you'll help me find them when I...
Yes, of course, will come. Yeah. Is this okay if we keep it?
Yeah.
This is open now.
Be very brief from the beginning and let the keynotes start quickly.
Yeah.
Make some kind of summary afterwards.
I'll go to say hello to Sirpa.
Yes. Okay, the technical break is over.
We won't have questions then after this anymore, because I'll be leaving soon.
Aha!
Slide over.
Okay.
You have to be involved directly.
Technical break is over, but the technical discussions continue. We're opening the last session of the day. I hope you're still in good shape. My name is Cecilia Mattsson, and I work for the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm also the chair of the Nordic Environmental Footprint Group that has been organizing this with a very excellent support from the Ari and his Finnish team. Thank you very much for hosting us and taking care of all the practical details. We have now reached, as I said, the last session of this conference. It's been a long day, and we're finally getting into the political dimension of PEF and environmental footprints. And we'll start off, I'll straight away give the floor to Sirpa Pietiainen. Excuse me for the pronunciation. We have two keynote speakers. Sirpa will start, and then we'll have Nikolai Kristoffersen from the Danish meat industry. And after that, it will follow a panel discussion. We'll invite two more secret, they're not secret anymore. Two more panelists, but right now, I would like to welcome Sirpa up here to give her keynote speech. Please.
And before we move to the speaker, we will reveal the results of our poll. And just technical information for everybody, the questions in Slido will be closed for this session already. But you are very much welcome to ask your questions directly. And here are the results.
This will, and I can mention that this will, of course, be part of documentation, and all the presentations will be available on the PEF site after the conference. So there was a question on that before. Please.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your votes. I noticed that I was not in the group of most favored solution. But I do hope that after this discussion, I could convince at least some of you to use it as a regulatory compulsory tool. And let me try to explain you a bit why I have come to this conclusion. This doesn't sort of prevent that the PEF would be used on voluntary basis to start with. Firstly, old wisdom, you get what you measure. And if you pose the wrong questions, and if you measure wrong things, you get wrong answers. Wrong question quite often doesn't give you the right answer. It must be an accident. Then I won't be preaching you about circular economy, resource efficiency, climate change, and not even about the point that we have about 20 to maximum 30 years to change totally and drastically the change of the course of the globe. That means the resource efficiency. With 1/10 of the resources, the same well-being, at least the same income for the businesses, and the same savings of the products and goods. Not harming the environment. Designing out of the waste with closed loops. Within 30 years, maximum. using now 1.5 planets, needing, if we do not have a major change, up to 4 planets within 30 years. So this is a major issue. And we sort of compared with this, any financial crisis is like a birthday party with the kids. So, and being graduated from the Helsinki School of Economics, the measuring and accounting seems to be pretty sort of close to my mind. Why do you have compulsory accounting for companies? Why do you audit the accounts? Why can't you have the dairy industry have their own accounting system? Because certainly you can't have the same accounting for financial sector, nor retail, nor textiles. Totally different business. No, why don't you leave it voluntary? Those ones who want to have accounting, they can have accounting, and if they wish they can audit their accounts. Those ones who don't want, well, it's their business. Probably you would choose those companies that are using accounting, not those ones that are cheating and not doing that. And that, of course, would sound totally crazy, wouldn't it? Well, how do you manage that kind of world that you don't know if you would invest your pension funds? What is the profitability of this company compared to another dairy company? Is the dairy sector itself, if you don't have any of the figures how to compare, more profitable than retail or textiles? The unity harmonization means comparability, and without the comparability, you can't make good and rational choices. And this is actually the case what we are having at the moment in environmental field. And there are a lot of discussion. I'm coming to this very quickly in a minute. And you have different kind of eco-labels. You have different kind of, integrated reportings, environmental reportings. You have eco-designs. You have BEF. You are developing a monitoring platform of resource efficiency, and so on, so on, so on. How can you decide what is the best policy? And let's come to the challenge. The biggest fear what we have at the moment, environmental economic-wise, is that if we make investments, sunk investments, if we think that, okay, this sort of an energy or food production is good one, okay, let's use all of our forests to produce bioenergy. Looks like, according to figures, that this is a good choice. Then you stock all of your finances or industries on this. You might end up noticing after 5 or 10 years, well, actually, this was not that much of a pretty good choice. It's a bit like the diesel in cars. You can't make a sustainable car with the diesel, just tweaking it slightly better and saying, okay, this diesel car is slightly better than that diesel car. And that we do not know because that is not using any kind of a life cycle analysis. And if we have misinvestments, we do not have the time to reinvest on right kind of sustainable products and choices. And this is a paradigm shift. It's a bit a Copernican challenge. It's new kind of world. I'm not going to preach you a bit that much more about having services, service economies, having tenfold resource efficiency, having this kind of disruptive changes in goods. Then, what should you have? You should have integrated, harmonized, compulsory, regulated indicators, resource efficiency indicators. That is prepared in the OECD, that is prepared in the UNEP, UN Environment, that is prepared in several universities, it is prepared in IMF, it is prepared in the Environmental Agency of the EU, it is prepared on the London School of Economics, and so on and so on. Slightly differences, as you notice, in the life cycle analysis also. So this is not the sort of a challenge that you couldn't overcome to put these different kind of models together. And indeed, the BEF was trying to do this. Okay, let's see what kind of a calculation methods you have. How do you put them together? How you make a coherent indicator calculating life cycle analysis set. And now what we are having in front of us is this list. You might want to check in Sustainable Finance Initiative that just came from the Commission, and the idea is sort of to integrate in investments, financial regulation, and in the long run in company reporting, integrated reporting, and in due diligence for investors, the resource efficiency and environmental matters. Because if you make bad investments in coal, for example, in our pension funds, you are probably not being able with fully escape the climate change to pay our pensions. And there we are talking about. You need to the indicators, you need to measure then. If you ask the companies, please report. Report your environmental impact. And if you say to investors, please show us what is your due diligence, how you choose your investments. It can't be up in the air that everybody sort of develops their own method, can it? No, it can't. That's why we need to have a harmonized European indicators, standards. What is the calculation method? And basically it is the resource efficiency ones, very sort of an easy, that is on the PEF2. Okay, how much of resources? Then how much of the water? Then what is your impact on the other ecosystems? And that is the pollution, that is the impact on the green infrastructure, biodiversity. It is a question how much of energy and what kind of energy. And then as a separate category, of course, the CO2. There. And there you need the harmonized figures. And it needs to be reported there and compared. Then you might remember the link to resource efficiency, the circular economy. There's under the development the monitoring platform. So how do we monitor whether we are moving towards the circular economy or not? Then again, you need the indicators. And what I'm slightly worried is that there's a separate sort of a DGs in the Commission and separate groups sort of wondering what kind of a sustainable finance indicators you would have. How do you sort of identify what is green and what is not? Then you have the other DG working with the monitoring platform and wondering how do you pick up the resource efficiency indicators there. Then voila, Eco-Design Directive. So far we have the energy efficiency, but there are a lot of needs and drivers to have it horizontal, so that there are general requirements about upgradability, reusability, repairability, and other factors. So you would need to be able to label like you label in Ecolabel, the categories. Okay, who's gonna develop these indicators? And how do you calculate that? Now we come to the PEF. Where do you start calculating the CO2 impact? On the door of the factory and you stop on the door of the factory. Or genuinely on the cradle, and how you define what is the cradle in this sector and what is the grave in this sector. And how you take into account what you discussed, the longevity of the goods. Or indeed in circular economy, if the fiber is recycling 10 times, you have to take that into account. And then, of course, and this is how I see what I see the role for the PEF, there's the EU product environmental footprint methodology. So, indicators first, these more or less the 8 environmental impact indicators, a bit different valuation in different sectors, of course, and then the methodology is the environmental footprint, where you start the calculation and where you ended up. And the same thing is, as you know, done in international level, and I know this has been taken in the paperwork already onto the board, the ecological footprint, and there's the global footprint network, there's the ISO processes on carbon footprint and environmental management life cycle assessment, and there are the GHG protocols and others. Someone would need to take the lead. And basically it is the EU who should put the methodology on the core. It is a bit like, you know, IFRS or accounting. You do not assume that there's an objective, ultimate knowledge how you calculate in brand value or the value of the assets. You know, it is changed once in a while in the international accounting standard. You agree on the approximation, what seems to be the best methodology at the moment. And then after the financial crisis has happened on IFRS, you change the preconditions on calculating the asset values on real terms. That might happen and probably happens with the environmental resource efficiency methodology too. When you go on and you learn, you tweak and you develop the process. But you have to start somewhere, not to expect that, okay, you have to try it, you have to example it, you have to have different kind of flowers all around the place because you do not know what is the right one. The biggest one is to get the harmonized methodology. If some percentages is calculated in this model a bit differently than in a theoretical perfect world, that is not the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake is not to do this. And then again, I bet my head there's going to be, whatever is the methodology, huge outcry. Because knowing that the next speaker is coming from meat industry, the meat industry is not happy with the same methodology that the construction industry or any industry is going to be. And probably the dairy industry is disagreeing with digital ICT industry preferences. But so it is in accounting too, because it evaluates the things a bit differently. And this is just something we have to live with. We can't sort of tailor-made it differently in all the sectors. Of course, in the accounting, you take a bit of a different approach depending in which industry you're working. But the sort of the whole general calculating methodology isn't totally different, let's say in the valuation, for example. And where we need this international flora, the academics, the research centers and PEFs, is the validity and reliability. As long as it is voluntary, you lack the validity and reliability. And this is, let me pick up one continuous fight that I come across at least 10 times per year. It is construction industry. There comes the concrete men having sort of the studies, and I do not doubt their studies, telling that there's at least 20 academic studies showing the concrete is the best construction material. And I do not have the capacity to go through these hundreds and thousands of pages and analyze the calculation mathematics, what they are having. Ooh, you might have a mistake there, sir. And then I meet the Finnish wood industry. And guess what? The wood is the best and most sustainable construction material, basically always. And at least the same 20 different academic non-partial studies. And there again, a lot of pages with mathematical figures. I can't judge. And I can't judge where did they start actually the life cycle analysis and what was the presumption that they came to that kind of a totally different kind of an outcome. Both are environmentally the best solutions. Then what happens? Should I as a Finn choose to prefer wood always in the construction, even with the risk that it might go wrong in some of the places? No, I don't think so. If it would be only industry policies, probably yes, please do buy Finnish wood products and meat products. But because this has a severe environmental impact, we better get it right. And the combination when and how you use cement and when and how you use the wood. Not to sort of have this kind of a auction of lobbying which you choose. And as long as you don't have the harmonization, you can't rely on the validity and reliability. That is the case. And then just two notions. One is the factor 10 to be included. So if you have any this kind of green labels, because you can't say to, actually I think you shouldn't say to a consumer, or be it a B2B consumer, that this is a green, this is a good product. If it's slightly better than what you need, there might be total industry areas you do not have green products. You better start inventing and doing them. You might have sort of a candidate or close to candidate. And that's why the factor 10 should be sort of the benchmarking. That is a sustainable product or production or a organization. And it should genuinely include the whole life cycle. This I underline millions of times. Once again, emphasize on the whole lifespan. And this is sort of calculating so that it sort of always emphasizes the longer lifespan, but the same model, sort of a metal structure, has to be for long-lasting and short-lasting products that are by definition different. But then you can't, of course, compare a milk that you are drinking right now with some sort of a construction material that is supposed to last for 100 years. But then you shouldn't, sort of the basic methodology should still be same. And then, sorry, not defined by the industry. You get quite a legitimate interest there, and if I would be working in industry, I would be in favor for whatever is the sector also. And then again, that comes to the fact that then when we get this place, this is something you would need to have as the same core methodology in all policy sectors. Then again, in the longer run, when we are sort of having the sustainable budgeting initiatives and accounting what is the impact of the budgets, the same indicators, the same LCA methodology. It needs to be the same on the public side and on statistic, and then on the private side. And this is actually sort of the idea of accounting too. You have a slightly different emphasis, but you calculate in the same way, be it by a private or public or whatever sector that is. So if you would have some benchmark, I would use it, the benchmark as in accounting, plus then the reliability in auditing, that it needs to be audited whoever and how it is done. Then a Nordic example, and how it gets wrong, and if you can't get wrong, and I'm not blaming Saab, I'm congratulating it, and actually I have a Volvo that is about 30 years old. And you know that the car sector, and I do sympathize them, are telling with very extensive figures that you should buy a new car. Of course, because if you compare the emissions and the use of the energy to the old one, it is so much better and more effective. But if you would have harmonized the whole life cycle analysis, I tend to believe those figures telling that you need to drive close to 30 years with your car before you get even on the more efficient, let's say 5-fold efficient new car. And then again, this just as an example. I don't blame those ones selling the cars. They need to get their food somewhere. But if we want to save the planet, then it would be horrible to incentivize people buying new cars, even though they would be electric cars. That's of course nice if you tend to buy a car that you buy electric instead of a fossil fuel based. But generally, buying a new car is probably not so good idea. And by the way, in Finland we are doing it with scrapping incentives, and it is based on these calculations that it is good for environment. It's not. Then, so it is with pure good intentions you get the wrong results. Then will it be easy? Yes and no. This is also accounting, as I said. Is it ever going to be perfect? Do all the companies hate IFRS systems? And do they cheat sometimes? Yes, they do. But I know people that break the law and steal from the shops too, and they do not pay their taxes. That's not an excuse not to have a system in place. And was that all in all so difficult to agree some sort of a common set of standards? Doesn't seem to be so. And the whole sort of a business community, even though they might hate some bits and pieces of IFRs, in general seem to agree that it's sort of a pretty good idea to have a globally same kind of a system when you account and when you evaluate the value of companies or you compare their income or their profitability. Basically the same thing. And that sort of is my last point. And the point is that the EU should do it itself, and there is sort of a vacuum at the moment for that one who makes those global initiatives as a global agreement. Then it is voluntary, you get the most progressive companies on board, and sooner or later it's going to emerge as a global standard like the IFRS itself is. It is not a global convention by the UN, it is a voluntary standard. But it is supported and endorsed by USA, China, EU, and so practically it has the same force than the legislation. Thank you listening for my provocation, and let's see in which way it sort of ended with your thoughts of needs for regulatory and harmonized approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Sirpa, for this very awakening provocation, and maybe I see it as a request to add mobility and transportation for the transition phase. It has been discussed. Maybe we can put it on the wish list from Sirpa. We will wait with questions until the next keynote speaker is done, and unfortunately I must tell you that the Slido operator is has left the building, so we cannot really do that anymore, but we'll find ways to get in touch with you. And by that, I would like to welcome the next keynote speaker, Nikolaj Kristoffersen, Director of Danish Meat Sector and Danish Agriculture and Food Council. Welcome. Thank you. And Ari will help you find the presentation.
Yes. Is it working? And just switch for the arrows here. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Now, thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak today on behalf of the Danish meat sector. I will give you an overview of what the Danish meat sector is, primarily. I hope you're still awake. This is the last presentation, I will not have not taken a lot of slides with me, more pictures, and I think that we today have touched upon some of the crucial parts already. Some of the parts being labeling, also about the data that we put into this PEF standard. So some of the things that I will come across today in my presentation, we have been around it more or less, but I will try to give the Danish meat sector's perspective on these things. Shortly, I have been working in the meat sector for more than 10 years. I have also been in Brussels. When I left Brussels in 2008, we saw the beginning of this, and then it have just developed a lot since then. But now we are in 2018, and we are very close to have something that is very interesting also for the market, that we can navigate using these PEF standards. That is something that we have a big interest in, at least for the Danish meat sector. Just so you know what kind of business we are in Denmark, I'm also representing the Danish beef sector, but it's not that big as we are in pig meat. We are one of the world's biggest exporter of pig meat. We produce around 2 million tons of pig meat. Just to give in comparison, in the whole world production is around 100 million tons of pig meat produced each year. China is one of the biggest producers of pig meat, around 60 million tons of pig meat they produce each year. They also consume a lot of it. And luckily for us, they also import something from Europe and Denmark. We produce around 32 million pigs in Denmark. We are 5 million inhabitants in Denmark, so we can't eat all of it. So we have to export a lot. That means that we export 90% of our production to the world market. Some of the main markets, you see the split in the small figure here. That 70% of our export goes to the European market, with markets like Germany, UK, Poland, Italy, Sweden, and other EC countries as our main focus. 30% is going outside Europe. That is markets for like Japan, Russia was formerly very interesting, but after the trade war between European Union and Russia, that disappeared. So luckily we got China and Hong Kong, which is a big market for the meat market in the future. Why I'm mentioning also our export is that when we look at consumers and how do they see on this thing that we are discussing today, then as an industry we are also looking upon who are we delivering to. Of course, Europe is another market than Asia. There is a big demand of meat, for meat in Asia. Their primary focus is price, quality, and very much food safety in that market. If we go to Europe and the Western European markets, then we have other things. Of course, you still have the focus on the price, quality. You also have on traceability, origin of the meat. You have animal welfare, and then you have sustainability, environmental performance, prioritize lower on the categories. But coming back, we have mainly two companies, Danish Crown and Tican. In Denmark, we have cooperatives. That means that the farmers, they own the slaughterhouse. And why I'm mentioning that is when it comes to this and by documentation and creating data, then it's very easy for our slaughterhouses. If there is a demand in the market, if there is a client that wants to do something or ask for something for our industry, then we can easily have a dialogue with the farmers. Can we try to get the data? Can we do something on this matter? So that is actually quite a good thing for us. We believe that we have the cooperative system in Denmark and in other European or Nordic countries. But that was the figures. When coming back to the PEF, why is it important for us, this PEF work? Why do we take it seriously? We do it primarily because of the consumers. You know, as everybody else, that there's an increasing awareness about the climate change. We heard it from the presenter before. We as an industry also wants to take responsibility in this area. We have our consumers. It's not a secret that meat is one of the things that is being discussed in the media, the consumers, reports, that has an impact on the climate. When you produce animals, there will be an impact. Our mission is to say, well, we think that there will be a kind of meat consumption also in the future. So you as consumers should demand meat from producers that can fulfill criteria and have less environmental impact. That's why we welcome this tool, technical tool, like the PEF standard. It is a need in the market, not only in the meat sector, I believe, but also in other sectors. We see consumers increasingly want to act on this. In the Nordic countries, we have this drought in this summer, and even though it has been on the awareness of the consumers, I can't open the newspapers, the radio station, and also some of the TV stations, where you can see that now you don't only rely on the politicians, that you as a consumer have to do something yourself. Whether that is a long-lasting trend, I don't know, but if we go into that, then we as a deliverer of meat have to go in that direction and also help the consumers to buy products that actually fulfill the overall goal, to have less impact on the climate. That is a lot of analysis and research that is also documenting these trends. We can see that the consumers are changing. We can see meat demand is, some countries it's decreasing. We don't know whether it's because of the climate. It's also because consumer demands, they are shifting as everything else in the world today. They go from that you cook a meal at home, that you have in the food service, you have it other places where you, in restaurants where you eat your meal. So we need much more research into that. But the problem for us as an industry when we want to communicate with the consumers is that it's key for us that it's been doing in a transparent way and a trustworthy way. We are used to act on more than 130 markets around the world. We are used to open our door to client consumer demands, and we want to do that as well on this issue with environmental performance. But we are also, as an industry, a little bit afraid of going out, telling the consumers, because we don't have this harmonized way of calculating our impact today. And I think that was one of the things that we should reflect a little bit on the drivers for using the PEFs on the market. Then I think to be able to trust this methodology is very important from our industry. And hopefully we will end up there. I will come back to that. Yes. This has also been mentioned, I think it was Mr. Galotola who mentioned that it's a jungle out there, so I will not be using a lot of time of that. But for the consumers, but also a little bit for the industry, it is a jungle. If we as an industry want to benchmark against others, it takes a lot of resources to go into say what kind of methodology have been used. We have some resources, but if, as a consumer, it's really a jungle. So help is needed, and hopefully it's under its way. And the dilemma is, of course, if you look at this piece of meat, nobody is capable of saying, just by looking at this piece of meat, what kind of categorization, is it good for the environment or is it bad for the environment? We need help, whether it should be label or anything else, that's another discussion. I think that we heard some of the presentation also by the former presenter from Colruyt, that we need some training, and that will also be some of my conclusion is that we need to practice on using this. It's very important for us as a sector that we don't go into just one direction. We need to see and use this tool as the best way and practice, and then at a later stage maybe you can talk about more harmonization, but at the beginning we need to practice and together with for example retailers on doing this. The product environmental footprint, we have been, as an industry, also engaged via our European organization, EuReCPV, in conducting this PEF on the meat. We are not finished yet, but we are still working on this, making a category rule for meat. It will be published one here by the end of this year. and I hope that that will be a tool for further communication also with the European Commission. We see this, as I mentioned before, as one of the solutions also for the consumers and also for the industry, that we have this common understanding on calculating the impact. So, what is very important for us in Denmark, we need primary data. We have had a lot of discussion about data today. I'm not an expert, technical expert in all these, but I think we, from the Danish perspective, see a very much some positive elements in this development of the PEF. We have a tradition of lots of data. You say, actually I heard one of our farmers yesterday was surprised that he's both a producer of pigs, but also a producer of data. And all this data is actually something that a lot of other people would like to have. So primary data is very important for us. And to sum up the discussion today, we saw some from Mr. Galotola's presentation about the verification of this data. That is very, very important that we have third-party audited of this data, because it comes back to one of my former slides, trust and transparency. If we once fail with this, then it's not good for the market. The consumers will say, well, we can't trust this. So we really need to have good data and be sure that we have a third-party audit on these data. Yes, data, it's a big task for the industry. You have secondary data you can use, but if you want to have primary data, then it's a very big task. We are in the process of building this database where you can pick out the data. It will take 3 or 4 years to build up this database. And I was happy to hear that other partners also are working with the focus on primary data. But it's really a huge task, and I can only say that you have to be close to the academia, universities, but also the help of the government to conducting these, set up these huge database. So we are in the process of doing that, and hopefully we will be able to put in the right figures to the standards. Yes, coming to the conclusions, just again, should it be summarizing again that it should be business. Let us try these, let us use these tools maybe for years and try to develop on this, whether the labeling should be voluntary or mandatory. It's up to legislation, but we would prefer market-driven initiatives also to see the effect of this. I can only refer to what has been the case on the animal welfare. It has also been discussed many years to have a labeling. You see now in some Nordic countries, on Holland, Germany, Denmark, that you are having labeling schemes on animal welfare where you actually use some scientific base, not comparable at all to the PEF, but whether that will develop into some more mandatory schemes, I don't know, but for the beginning, let business try to use this. Then again, data, it's very important to have primary data. I think that was it. Yes.
Thank you. Can you please sit down here? Yes. I'll get the other people up here. Thank you, and I'll ask Nikolai to please sit down, and Sirpa to please come back up here to join us for a panel discussion, and I'll also ask 2 more people to join us. Please, Michele, no rest for the wicked. So please come back up here. And Eva Eiderström from the Swedish Nature Conservation Association, NGO in Sweden. Welcome up and please sit down. And while you find your seats, I will... Torben mentioned before that we get 30,000 messages per day on an average normal business working person, so it might be a good idea to quickly go through what has been happening with all the impressions you had during the day. I'll get back to you in just a sec. So we've started off in the morning with a very inspirational introduction speech from Ann-Marie Virolainen from the Finnish government, who reminded us about the Agenda 2030 and the target on sustainable consumption and production, and how important the access to reliable information is for reaching this target. So this exercise that the Commission has launched is to a large extent also connected to this need for information for consumers and businesses to make the right choices. And we also heard that the Circular Economy Action Plan, I'm trying to interpret my notes here from the morning, I'm sorry, they're very difficult to read. I had a good idea in the morning, but it disappeared. Anyways, we also heard that the buyers and investors more and more ask for this kind of information. And that we have the tools to provide it. It's just mainly about using them. The tools are available now. And the process to harmonize the PEF tools with other existing policy tools is ongoing. In session 2, we had some really good initiatives on these, how to use the PEFs. From Colruyt, we learned that LCA and or environmental footprint can help a business identify hotspots and also discuss how to come to terms with them, how to decrease the environmental impact from your organization. And these the environmental footprint studies can provide a basis for decisions on what measures to take. L'Oreal told us about their Sharing Beauty with All initiative and how important the information and empowerment was to this process. So it's all in the line with making information available. And also that it's possible to take both environmental and social impacts into consideration when doing this kind of studies. I assume that they're also taking the economic impacts into consideration as being a business, so we didn't need to mention that specifically. Autotech gave us a very good summary, I think, of what it was like being part of the pilot study. So for all of you that hasn't been following the pilot tests up until now, the Autotech, thank you very much. It was a good summary of that. And how much learnings there is from participating in this process. Okay, and we had just recently the session on communication. The experiences both from the Nordic work and from the pilots works. Once again, it's what the consumers are asking for. They want clear and easily interpretable and actionable information. That was also part of the findings from Italy, that it's possible to implement the existing PEF methodology in practice already today, and consumers will react on it. And last but not least, Ari told us about the SWAN, or Type 1 eco-labels, that there are differences between the PEF methods, but there are also synergies and possibilities to use them both, to develop both methods. And by that, we'll move back into the political dimension. And we heard the visions from Nikolai and Sirpa. Thank you very much. We also understood that the proliferation of methods is still a problem from all your information still after the pilot is finished. That was one of the main reasons the pilot was started, and that the Commission presented the proposals for a common methodology. So we heard Nikolai and Sirpa's visions just recently. I would like to give Eva and Michaele a chance to react to these also. Do you have anything you want to say about your visions for the future green market? This as a reaction to the keynote speeches. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. First, perhaps I should just briefly explain that I work for the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, which is a non-governmental organization. And we happen to operate an eco-label called Bra Miljöval, and I'm in charge of the label. So that's part of my background. But I also work a lot with consumer campaigning on trying to shift focus currently from consumption to prolonged life of goods and services. But we have in history worked a lot with focus on the retailer sector, trying to get them to shift what's in the shop shelves so that we, by shifting our hand in the shelf, might do a better selection of goods and stuff. Our green visions, I think there's a certain frustration, of course. We're always frustrated. We happen to be optimists, although the situation is so terrible as it is. But the frustration lies in the time and the challenges ahead. And I do commend the Commission for this ambitious work on improving the LCA methodology, which I think is really great. But at the same time, I clicked for product policy because I see the scope of the problem necessitating a combination of tools to support the changes. Although I work for an eco-label, I would not say that it's a particularly dynamic tool in itself. It is when you have something that supports the shift in the market, sometimes by challenging producers to actually go beyond what they think is business logic or what they used to do for the last 25 years, and showing them that there's actually a segment in the market which they missed, and sometimes by addressing policy changes. And I think that combination is much needed, and I would like to see measures or things that actually would support politicians so that they dare take bold steps. And I think that's a task for us. I think that's a task for all of us, because in the end we will always have target conflicts. If I'm about to run a company for profitability, of course I would prefer to have incremental changes, which are, small step-by-step approaches. But with the current scope of the challenge, I think that we cannot be so pleasant about the changes needed. And one suggestion that I think, we've talked about polluter pays principle for a long time. What would happen if PEF was connected to a system where the red products actually paid more, trying to implement that they would cost more in the market? Price is the one key instrument that we actually have an easy way of interpreting when we go purchasing stuff. So if we meant reality with this, the good guys should actually have a benefit in the market towards the bad guys. And, in essence, I don't think we should ever allow the red products in the marketplace. But that's an even tougher question. So that would be one of my more innovative solutions. Link the PEF to some kind of tax shift or, burden of the polluter.
Thank you. Michaele, do you want to react to it? If not, I can give you a background picture of a vision behind you if you need help here.
No, I can see it. Well, this proposal by itself will be enough to keep the next Commission busy for the next 5 years, I guess. It's not that straightforward, but we cannot deny that that is something that I could see myself as a medium-term objective. You have to be very careful when you propose something that becomes mandatory, or when it's something that has a so direct link to budget, like taxes, incentives. Then you need to have a method that you can really defend in court, because you will be brought to court every second day by industry, that's for sure. And that is why we think that this method has a great potential and to deliver all this, but we have also to be careful to implement it in a stepwise approach. How that translates into the political domain, it's a complex question, and I really appreciate the intervention from Miss Pietikäinen, who was also our guest at the conference in April this year. She intervened as keynote on the phone that time because he couldn't be in Brussels. So I really think that, and this is more on a personal level, not necessarily this opinion is yet shared among services in the Commission, but I really think that there was a time where market-driven tools were the most suitable solution for the historical situation we were living in. Maybe that time is not anymore the right one. Maybe we need now to move towards other approaches, which doesn't mean necessarily the full mandatory one. We keep using in our internal conversation to the example that France has somehow pointed in their legislation on construction products, where basically the idea is nothing is mandatory, but the moment you make a green claim, then you have to follow the same rules that are valid for everybody else, and you have to make that information available and verifiable. So that is a kind of a hybrid system between the fully voluntary and fully mandatory that maybe could be more interesting and more implementable in the short term. Maybe.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to? Oh,
thank you, and I appreciate very much the work what the Commission has been doing and is doing, and your cautiousness, of course, about the methodology, because you shouldn't throw something for the wolves that you lose in the first court case. So, of course, there's a lot of background, but I would hate to prolong this process too long, because you end up in this kind of a never-ending story. Do you have enough information? Is it the adequate and right calculation method? And you never ponder in that detail the issues in accounting, as I referred. Then the second, and in theory I'm very supportive for this green claim approach, like it is in sustainable finance, the green bonds. But then again, in real life, we might be doing just the opposite what we want to do. Because then those ones making the green claims, our agriculture is better, or these financial products is better, do have the burden of validity and reliability. And those guys who doesn't even care to say it is green are let loose. It's a bit like the accounting would be voluntary, but those ones who would be then making mistakes would be punished. And those ones who wouldn't actually even bother to make accounting would be left loose. And I just wonder which one would be more appealing to companies. And that's why I would like to take those ones exactly who don't want to do this to be part of it. And so transparency of the data is important, gathering the data, and then using that data as a basis to show those ones that actually are the problems.
Thank you. We've been touching on that before, knowing who gives information and who doesn't. You mentioned it in your presentation also, that you sometimes were almost reluctant or hesitant to inform consumers if there wasn't a harmonized network. So if you want to elaborate on that or comment on what's been said from the panel, you're more than welcome.
I can maybe comment on, if I understood from you, Eva, that if you want to build in, if there's a premium for giving the consumers this information, is that correct?
If there's a premium for consumers.
Is there a premium for the producers to giving consumers this information about environmental performance? If I understood you right.
Sorry, no, I was unclear. No, my task on it, my take on it was that if you employ the polluter pays principle, which is the one that states that it should be more costly to bring stuff to the market which are inferior, then whether you're red or green should also define what kind of premium you as a producer must pay before you put your stuff on the market. Whether that will influence price is a different issue, but it would be more costly to produce a red product than a green product. And you would, you know, whatever system is there to make distribution between them, I don't know. But that could be one way of actually penalizing those who have not, you know, put an effort into becoming more green, but end up in the red or yellow scale.
You mean something like the bonus-malus?
Yeah, it sort of shifts the burden. And price is usually, if price could reflect the environmental burdens, that would need no more labeling and stuff. That would be a fairly straightforward, easy to interpret signal to consumers. I mean, EEB and myself are not propagating that we start with the business to consumer part. I think the business to business is the place where the PEF will be actually tested. Because if that works, then you have a market for the tool. Otherwise, you don't have a market for the tool. And you shouldn't be inside out pushing stuff on consumers unless you use it yourself. And the thing we see is, of course, that something which is really good should be able to communicate. We need less of confusing communication. And then if we don't want a signal in terms of a pictogram, price would be a good signal. But that, of course, I realize the difficulties of getting a tax system in place that is related to whatever performance level you are at within your benchmark scale, sort of. But it's a way of thinking.
Thank you. Michele.
Yes, I would like to continue the conversation with Sirpa. When I say the green claims, of course, that is one piece of the puzzle. It cannot be the only action. I mean, in order to really move and change the situation, we need to work on different axes. Just give one example. Until today, we still have a voluntary green public procurement system. Notwithstanding, the Commission has several times tried to propose a mandatory scheme in Europe, and member states were refusing that. So, I mean, we need to also have not only a more brave industry, we also need more brave member states that really want to change the picture. Because one of the problems, and this is often not discussed in public for obvious reasons, is that the problem of implementing the idea that Eva was suggesting, that Sirpa was suggesting, is that in order to do that, you have to change the status quo. And by the way human brain works and our society is structured, changing the status quo is the most difficult thing that you can do. Because there is a huge conservatism in everything we do, from our personal life to our professional life. When in 2013 the Commission issued the recommendation 179, putting forward the PEF-OEF methods, in the recommendations was written, dear member states, dear private companies, the next time you do something that is looking at LCA and product policy or schemes like that, please use this because this is the best available method. And we did that, and only Italy took that seriously. Other member states did not. Other companies, with some exception, did not. Even the Commission itself, in studies that we were tendering and things that we were doing, we did not. No. So the problem is that we need to change ourselves before asking other people to change it. This is valid for the Commission, this is valid for the European Parliament, this is valid for the Council. And this is the way then to bring real changes to the market. I think GPP is a very useful tool. It's not the only one that we should bring forward. There are possibilities with the bonus-malus system. There are things that some member states have tried. There's a lot of work that could be done, but it cannot be only one actor pushing for it. No. You need a systemic change.
And that's been a very important part of the pilot process, I think, having the multi-stakeholder process, and just a short panel discussion like this, we see how valuable different perspectives and how important this cooperation is. And it seems at least the panel, parts of the panel and the audience are ready for changes you're talking about. I have a question from the audience if somebody has a microphone. I'm not running. Thank you, Ari. Oh, yeah. Nej. Okay, one there and one there. And please say your...
Thank you. I'm Timo Tyrväinen, Chief Economist of Climate Leadership Coalition Finland. Michele talked about status quo, breaking it, and Sirpa talked about need of comparability, and Eva about optimism, need of optimism, need to be that we should be optimistic, and I will start with Eva's point. The reason why I am now much more optimistic than a few years ago is that financial community has now taken a very strong position as far as climate risks are considered. The highest authority of financial market, Financial Stability Board, includes G20 countries with their central banks, has stated that all companies, all financial actors, starting from investors, starting for investment funds, private persons, need to have all available information about risks of companies which are related to climate-related issues. An example, BlackRock, probably largest global investor, just very recently sent a request to questionnaire to 120 global largest, most important companies. How have you reacted to these requests? And this is something, this is a kind of push factor, which is about to change the status quo. And I think that all the in a way the mental surroundings where we talk about PEFs or whatever these kind of actions, this political surrounding will change very quickly in the coming 2 or 3 years, and therefore in a way the status quo will be different. And the comparability, this is the idea. Investors need to be able to compare companies. Thank you.
Thank you for this reminder that we have other tools. I kind of missed who was first, but Eva, I'll go ahead. Eva, you want to comment on this? And we have a question up there too.
Well, you have to be aware. Although I'm an optimist, I'm not naive. We have a fantastic increase of renewable energy production, and we don't have a decrease of fossil energy use. Unfortunately, the substitution has not taken place. So, and we don't have a lot of companies that realize that they are sitting very close to being owners of stranded assets. I mean, oil assets that are worthless, and because they're all waiting for who will, in this chicken race, who will opt out and still make money before it sort of sinks. And I'm sure that if they realize that they should opt out now, we will have a fairly big economic crisis because of the changes in investment policies. So we need bold politicians, I think, and I don't think that, I mean, as consumers and as a consumer rep to some extent, I of course want us all to be able to participate, to do what we can. But at the same time, we need this to be seen in a broader political framework where there's lots of things that needs to be done on an overarching scale. And PEF is nice, but still it's about incremental changes, which is not aggressive or very offensive to most companies. But at the same time, there is a need to somehow phase out to certain industries, and incremental changes is not going to help. So I think it's crucial to be, vigilant about the situation and the time. And this is to Michele. I know you have been struggling for the last 5 years to get 16 product-specific requirements in place. But the scale of it. In a retailing shop, you might have 25,000 articles. I don't know how many product categories those would face, but just in a retailing shop, can you imagine how many years we will have before we have it in place? Sort of
modularity. Well, yeah. Do you want to comment on that? Last question from the audience.
Yeah. No, but first I would like to make a comment on the first question. You can see, or at least what I experience on a daily basis in my job of civil servant in Brussels is a clear discrepancy between what is said in public about the environment and how environment is critical and how we are going to fail if we don't change things, and then what is requested at higher level policy making and the CEO from industry. And I don't understand why we keep accepting that the financial accounting is an extremely complex, and Sirpa was mentioning that in her speech. It's extremely complex and nobody says a single word about it. And then when it comes to environment, the first thing that they ask is, it shall be simple. If it's not simple, it doesn't work. how can we reconcile that? Because we cannot come with something simple. Because if we get something simple, we will most probably get something wrong. And we cannot allow another failure there. So this is what I'm asking to my hierarchy and to the other people, say, why you are always asking when it comes to environment something simple, and you are ready to accept whatever when it comes to financial accounting?
Personally, I would think that's a relevant question. We have one last question from the audience, and unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'm going to let you ask your question, and then I have a question for you and for the audience, and then we'll have to finish. Please.
Okay, Sten-Erik Björling, Enviro Data, Sweden. I think that there is a significant risk that if Europe doesn't take its catches its senses and letting the grown-ups act and starting actually to create something, well, functional, the Chinese will run us over. The Asian market, the BRICS countries, all the SCO and all these things, they will totally just run us over. And I don't think that we would like to have a kind of an accounting system or an impact system that is defined by the Chinese. So this is not really an issue if we are going to let our politicians, I used to say sometimes, it's better to hate each other rich than hate each other poor. And that is the reason here. We have to more or less look after that that these systems function. And I would like to add a suggestion or question to this. I work now currently in a project, in the Horizon 2020 project called Circ for Life. And we are now looking into how to create accounting systems that follows a product not only through the use phase and to the end consumer until the point of recycling, but also how that accounting system can work in the recycling refurbishment phase. So that is one point that I would like you, I've seen through some of the documents inside for the PEF, and it's not very clearly or not very well documented on how this function should work with the recycling, refurbishing, and that process flow. That is something that you absolutely will have to work with, because you must be able to support users for being curators for the resources and the environmental impact they generate by their consumption. If not, then others will just run us over and we will have a resource catastrophe within 35 years. Sorry.
Thank you. Is this a question one of you want to reply to in 30 seconds? Or, no, we know, I lost my train of thought there. Do you want to react on it, Mikael, or no?
I can only repeat what somehow I said this morning. We are working on the digitalization of information along the supply chain. We are looking to if blockchain can help with that. We are working with GS1, which is the worldwide producer of barcodes, to see how to standardize the protocols to move the information. Then what happens after the recycling is something we still don't know, because we have to see also what kind of property can be transferred and how it can be transferred to start again the cycle. But at least I can reassure that this is an issue that it is on our radar. And
the overall aim of the study is to support the transition to circular economy. So you've been looking into the end-of-life formula, changing it into the circular footprint formula and so on too. And that's still under development. We have initiative in Sweden, I know. We can talk about that later. But yes, so thank you very much. Sure.
Briefly, to see the bright side of the coin, firstly, we underestimate the importance of the big data we are going to have soon, and that comes to different kind of data and calculations and others. There's going to be abundance of that, so that is not going to be so difficult. Secondly, I fully endorse the point that the finance community is more, I think they are the most radical besides the NGOs at the moment in the environmental and climate side. So they are great supporters on this issue, and we should sort of endorse that moment. And that comes to my actual proposal. Now when we are having this sort of a Nordic discussion, could Finland, being a chair of the EU pretty soon, and other Nordics take this initiative on the council, because the member states seems to be the biggest problem, and say, look, what we need is this sustainable finance initiative, we need the indicators, we need the BEF, we need sustainable budgeting and all that, plus the public procurement, that is 20% of our GDP, would make a significant difference.
Taina and Ori are smiling, so I think I would take that as a yes.
Just inform me when you've done it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I have one last question for the panel and for the audience, but we're hoping we had the Slido show so you could actually react to us, but you'll have to go in on our website to get, if you have any comments. The last question, you've already touched up on it, all of you, but it is, what would you within your organization and in your position go home to do now? And if we agree that there is a need for harmonized methods and PEF is a good step at least, please let us know from the audience. And Nikolai, please, do we have...
I will start.
Yes, please.
I will go home and tell them to continue our engagement in this work. I think our farmers, our industry is quite engaged in this, but we still need to tell them that keep up the focus. Then we will work on it's a bit boring, the data, primary data, collecting these data, so we'll be able to fill in the information when we have this PEF CR on the meat side. So that's short.
Thank you. Sirpa, do you want to?
Continue my political brainwashing. Don't know what is the impact anyway, but within my own political circles. Plus, then there are millions of reports that we are working in the Parliament. Sustainable disclosure reporting. Then there are green bonds. So that is the indicators to try to include this sort of a coherence aspect on there, and I convince you there's quite a sort of a growing group of us in different parties that are supportive to this approach.
You don't often hear brainwashing as a policy tool, but it's nice to wish you luck. Michael?
Yeah, the message I will bring home is that there is a clear difference between those who are using already PEF and those who keep discussing the theory of PEF behind. And then I will quote Verle, and because she said today, nearly literally, can we measure the environmental footprint? Yes. Can we calculate benchmark? Yes. Can we compare products? Yes. And these are people who are using PEF, and the other are talking about philosophy.
Yeah.
Okay. Eva, please.
And I will actually go back home and continue improving Bra Miljöval and campaigning on reduced consumption.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being such a great audience, and for the other speakers and for the Finnish team. Thank you. Så hemskt mycket. Ja.